We're at the Walker Arts Center for a Regis dialogue with Canadian filmmaker Guy Maddin. We'll be discussing his love of cinema, his humor, and his artistic vision. Bold, vivid, ironic. Maybe the first words to come to mind when considering filmmaker Guy Maddin's oeuvre, especially given his appetite for stylized black and white tableau depicted with a teeming, sometimes overwrought vitality. Boschscapes with the action and actors almost spilling out of the frames. That showmanship is then balanced by a sense of emotional detail. Although still young, his prolific output of films have garnered many awards as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Telluride Film Festival, making him the youngest recipient ever. I'm Elvis Mitchell, film critic for the New York Times. I'll be your guide through Maddin's work. And now we'll begin a Regis dialogue with Guy Maddin.
When I started out as a filmmaker, I didn't know how to get things all going in the frame all at once. I was dealing with inexperienced actors, and I just decided it best just to keep the camera bolted down, never move it, and then best just keep the actors still too. They might wander around and do something really terrible. And so it begins to feel like you're just sitting there in a seat watching, and you're waiting for something to happen, the way a little boy at a hole drilled in a wall would, who has a great deal of patience, would sit and watch something, just waiting. But also, I was that little boy at one time. I had a very quiet childhood, contemplative, left much to my own in the greatest possible way. I'm not pointing any accusing fingers at my parents or anything. I was brought home from the hospital the same day as our new television set. We were both put on the floor at the same time, facing each other. And whenever I grew bored with the television, I'd just wander off. And I lived above the family beauty salon, so there were these little chutes that led down into the basement from the baseboard in the beauty salon, where my Aunt Lil and my mother would sweep up hair trimmings and lift up a little flap and sweep it down that chute. And I loved climbing up that chute to get that illicit view of all those ankles lined up at the hair dryers. But every now and then my aunt would sweep a big face full of hair trimmings into me, and I guess the whole thing just sort of welded together into some sort of aesthetic.
Aesthetic, that's the word I use for it, yeah.
That was one of the first $3 words I learned as a kid. I knew what I was doing was an aesthetic.
Yeah, what we call actionable here in the States. It's an aesthetic up there in Canada.
Yeah, yes.
One of the things that fascinates me about your stuff, and I don't know if you were inspired by Mad Magazine or Hieronymus Bosch, but there's always a lot of activity. I mean, there's stuff spilling out of the frame. Where does that come from?
It might be fear that I think it is. I'm speaking quite seriously here. Just a fear that I don't have enough up there or something. So I just try to err on the side of too much if I have to. I'm completely self-taught, but I'm kind of lazy as well. And I know one thing, that I would never be that technically proficient, and that I don't come from a theater background, and I'm not sure how to direct actors particularly. I'm only now sort of getting up to speed with the kind of vocabulary actors use. And so I just thought that if, in case a performance is just derailing the whole movie, maybe if I just made it pretty in a very primitive way or something, or kept things busy with a constant sort of weather vanes switcheroo of attitudes, sometimes within the frame itself, that I could at least sort of disguise the fact through sort of a confusion of images that I wasn't always quite sure what I was doing on a moment-by-moment basis. I think, having said that, I have days where I'm completely cocksure and know exactly where I want to go, and making a movie. This movie, Archangel, my great amnesia movie, I tried to make a movie in which every major character had a form of amnesia, and so I really knew what I was doing, except I thought I did, but what I didn't realize is that I'd by the time I'd finished writing the script and then directing it, I'd kind of forgotten what I wanted to do as the screenwriter. And I was just moving ahead quite confidently while making it, filling the frame with a lot of stuff, watching a lot of Joseph von Sternberg, the director who collaborated with Marlene Dietrich on some really dense frames.
And really invented the way she was photographed in the movies.
Yeah, and lighting from above, and I tried imitating or just emulating and just bowing at the feet of those two people who put together 7 really amazing movies. So they were sort of my gods briefly, especially during this period. And I just thought that I would have these sort of strong narrative themes that would hopefully carry in spite of the relative inexperience of the actors and the director, and then maybe just try to film it with a kind of a primitive brio visually, and hope that would carry the day. The movie confuses everybody, and even when I rewatched it some 5 years after making it, I couldn't follow it very well. But I've learned to be proud of it anyway, because it is kind of it's at least the most willfully dreamy movie I've made. So.
But they're all dreamy, and I guess I want to ask you about Busby Berkeley, because there's a kind of momentum and movement, and especially putting people in lines, a kind of a symmetry that you like. Mm-hmm. That's, to me, very reminiscent of Berkeley.
I really like Berkeley. He's in the Olympus as well, for sure, but not... I kind of like the whole look of Warner Brothers from the 30s, and the Berkeley I really like are his first few years, 42nd Street and Gold Diggers of 33, 35.
Before they took themselves too seriously and became about spectacle.
Yeah, and there was something about just the art directors that studio had, where everything was one of the few studios that acknowledged the Depression, whereas most of the major American studios sort of went against it. When you think of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers movies, the floors are really polished and everything's clean and beautiful. But Warner Brothers embraced the grime and the dirt and the forgotten men of the war veterans, the homeless people, and the choreographies are elaborate and very strange. They're beyond sexual when you look at the especially those famous above, those overhead shots. They're where the women just become component parts of what look like the X-ray of a diseased colon or something like that. It does seem to go. I know he just sat in his bathtub and dreamt up all of his choreographies, but he was very close to his mother, and it's like his mother was collaborating with him by reminding him to keep a lot of fiber in his diet or something like that. There's just this kind of, in By a Waterfall especially, the women form this big snake-like chain which suddenly forms into 2 kidneys and then becomes, the 18-foot large intestine and then the small intestine and then just sort of a series of valves and things.
I'm not so hungry
yeah.
After that.
No, I defy you to look at the movies the same way from now on.
I'll never even look at them again after that.
But I like the way there isn't perfect symmetry. That I guess because he was blowing the budget on, he would always shoot the musical numbers early on, and sometimes he shot only the musical numbers, and another director handled the rest of the movie. But he would blow the budget right away, and so I guess he had only so many takes, and so and it was really hard and cruel on these chorus girls, to come out of the water in By a Waterfall with smiles plastered on their face and their eyes open and not blink, and sometimes they blink and sometimes they don't look so well, and because they've been shooting for 25 hours straight, and so there is no symmetry. There's so much lack of symmetry and a sort of a sloppiness about, and sort of a looseness about these spectacles that seems to spread like a contagion to, at least as a viewer of these things, to the women themselves. It seems like the women seem more loose or available somehow, or at least that it seems implied somehow. They're kind of horny spectacles.
But those pre-Code movies, they were actually a lot looser. I mean, those like the Gold Diggers of 33 before the Code.
And they were meant to be, but there's something just by making the choreography a little bit loose, it seemed like that ergo. everyone in them was more available too. And once again, it was that same thing though. They seem so willing to make themselves available to the viewer, but then there's that troublesome thick door, that 7 decades thick door, and so there's a real strange tension going on there. So I really like the sloppiness of his magnificence.
But that illogic in that kind of sort of magnetic, propulsive illogic in those musical numbers is really a big part of this movie. You know, that even if you're unsure, you know you want to push this thing forward, and that's what we get the sense that you're trying to keep this thing on track, or at least...
I'm so glad to hear you say that, because even though I had never made a musical until I shot a ballet version of Dracula a couple years ago, I always liked the logic, the fact that musicals just proclaim right out front, you know, I'm not real, you know, I'm artifice, and all movies are, and it's just a movie that just proclaims it loudly, and so I just wanted to say the same things with my movies right up front, that they're artificial, but that doesn't mean they're not true. That there's so much psychological truth in certain songs, in paintings, and no one would ever confuse them with real life. And in poems, in theater, in opera, and no one would ever walk up onto the opera stage thinking they were in a shopping mall or anything like that. You know, there's things are heightened and translated into different schema. And so I just feel that movies somehow, so many film viewers just watch things and go, oh, no, that's fakey, that would never happen, or something. But as long as it feels emotionally true or psychologically true, then a big, broad-stroked melodrama can still be very powerful. So I like to use the emboldening precedent of musicals and all the melodrama that comes with them in non-musical movies, and hopefully get a musical logic out of them.
Well, there is that, but I also think there's this weird schism or this weird intersection in your movies that has sort of the presentational aspect of silent or early sound movies,
right,
with the kind of representational feel of more modern movies, where there has to be a kind of an emotional logic, yeah, or an emotional detail. I mean, it's this weird amalgam, and it really sort of comes to the fore here. I mean, the eyes don't pop out quite so much. When the rabbits appear, it actually makes a kind of sense.
Yeah, I actually had heard from one of my muses is an old friend who's obsessed with aviation and wars and things, and I think there was some sort of wildlife episode from a war involving Fenians or something. I'm not even sure. I hate doing research, but he told me about these Fenians sleeping in their camp one beautiful starry night, and all of a sudden, all these beautiful woodland creatures, right out of Bambi central casting, came sort of pitter-pattering through their camp, and everyone was amazed and enchanted, and then horrified when they realized that the animals were being chased by a massive army of the enemy army that was creeping up on them in the dark. And it's just to have such a fluffy, cute portent of death come sort of just, you know, pitter-pattering over your face just before you're bayoneted, just seemed too irresistible to let my friend keep as a script idea for himself, and I stole it. He forgave me a couple years later.
We were talking backstage earlier. One of the things that I noticed in your work is even when shooting in color, the kind of luminosity you give to actors. I mean, maybe they don't get to do much, they get to look really great. And they're polished basically like silver jewelry. I mean, they really have this wonderful kind of warm but almost deco gleam.
Yeah, I guess the actors feel a little bit, because I deal with all sorts of levels of experience with these. Some of these are very great stage actors, and some of them are just people off the sidewalk. And they really, at times, I have to remember to be sensitive to their fears, because a lot of the time I'm spending so much time making the shot look just so that I'm abandoning them. But my favorite actors just sort of worked on their own and sort of got into the spirit of the movie making. I'm not too sure why it was important to me for that luminosity when so many movies don't go for it, and I can watch with a great deal of pleasure unluminous movies. But I think once again it's probably some sort of matter of natural selection. I'm working with very low budgets in a lot of cases, and trying to disguise papier-mâché sets with a certain amount of grain and luminosity. The cheapest prop is always the shadow. You can unplug a light and you get one. And then you can suggest a whole set in there with a sound effect. The dripping of a cave is all you need, not the actual cave. If you just turn all the lights. But the luminosity sort of works the same way. It kind of bends and smudges light up, and it just kind of, sometimes I fear that I'm a one-trick pony that way because I'm just so hooked on it. But I'll never get sick of just when things are really flaring just so, and they just seem just a little bit prettier. It helps. My screenwriting collaborator, George Tolles, and I always write with that in mind, that the stories are going to be occupying kind of an artificial stage scenery, dreamy kind of atmosphere, and we just write the plots accordingly. So at least the visual style isn't running athwart the text.
But you were telling me, and I know you mentioned this before, that you were sort of nudged into shooting this movie in color.
Yeah, I was. I'm very slow to change, and at this point I was still pretty firmly stuck in 1930. So I was forced to shoot it in color, and I'm really glad I was, because the movie's called Careful, and it's about an overly cautious community, and I started thinking of what kind of color would I didn't want to use color. I always feared using color. I'd just gotten comfortable with using black and white. And a color movie I love is Don't Look Now, Nicholas Regg's Don't Look Now, which is set in Venice, a very earth-toned Venice, where the only real noticeable color, and it happens only occasionally, is red. The red raincoat of a lost daughter or homicidal dwarf, and or some spilt blood, and the color really means something when you see it. And my biggest fear in shooting a color movie was that some
idiot critic would see, oh, look at all that gold in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or that a homicidal maniac color would somehow accidentally be in a frame. And so I took it upon myself to control the color a lot. And then I realized that I was being very cautious with the color, that I was being as cautious with the color palette as the characters in the movie were. They were living their lives under fear that any loud noise would set off an avalanche and kill them, and I was sort of feeling that way too. That if I put a loud color in there, that the movie would fall into a precipitous slide of tastelessness. So I thought I would shoot it in sort of cautious color, and I allowed only 2 colors at a time. There was it's kind of this alpine Caucasian apricot. The rouge that you see on everybody. And so that orangey apricot has many color complements on the color wheel. I don't know much about it. I just asked someone at the paint store, what goes with orange. And they showed me this neat color wheel. And so I learned that blue and violet and emerald green go really, strikingly with it. And so I just sort of designed this scene by scene in the movie and decided what color complement will go with this Alpine 1930 2-color Technicolor Caucasian hue, and so then every now and then I would allow a 3rd color in, just because I'm kind of sloppy with all of my promises, even to myself. It's kind of like a New Year's resolution, only 2 colors at a time. Okay, I'll let a yellow in or something like that, and that would frighten me, and I would then shoot a scene entirely in black and white, and then just tone it blue or just a monochrome. So some scenes just have 1 color only. As a matter of fact, the movie starts off with very bright contrasts, and then by the end of the movie, it ends up just being mostly monochromes. And that was because I ran out of combinations from the color wheel. I sort of didn't know where to go with it. So as the characters get more incautious, I got more cautious, strangely enough. I don't know why. This was another job for hire for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I was hired to shoot the Royal Winnipeg Ballet's production of Dracula. And it was originally meant to be an HD TV or HD color. And it just, when I read the book for
Had
the
you
assignment,
read the book before that?
I'd never read it before, and I was really surprised. I don't really like Bram Stoker's style, and I found it kind of tough slogging, but I was kind of excited by what I found in the book because I'd seen a number of the Dracula movies, and of all the horror movies I loved as a kid, I was always a little bit bored by Dracula for some reason. I think I was too young for it, or maybe the movies didn't pick up on the themes that seem important to Bram Stoker. It strikes me that what the book's about is just the way, I don't know how to put this glibly. I've always had trouble explaining it, but the way men deal with sexual and cultural and economic rivals. I don't want to sound like a professor about it,
but it's a book about paranoia, particularly about sexual paranoia.
And so many of the movies just they make Dracula kind of sexual, and they just make it a horror movie or whatever. But it just seems to be about how men are just transformed into monsters by jealousy. And I don't mean the monster Dracula. Dracula is actually produced. He seems to be conjured up out of their own paranoia. It starts with these women sleepwalking out to a cliff and looking at the horizon where other people live in other lands. And these men don't like these night thoughts the women are having. It sort of translates in Victorian times to these women are what they're thinking in their dreams we don't approve of. And so they rationalize it as these women are having, they have polluted blood. They have to be cleansed of it somehow. They don't like the fact that the women might be having erotic thoughts about other men. And so they villainize, they malign whoever that other man is, even if he exists or not, whether he does or not. And so Dracula is almost conjured up out of thin air by the jealousies of all the male suitors, and I guess by the night lusts and day lusts of healthy women. And you could even take Dracula, the character, out of the story, and the men and women would still be behaving the same way. Women, as they do, have their night and day erotic thoughts, private or otherwise, and men get really jealous and don't like it when they're not the center of or the focus of someone's night thoughts, and so Dracula is almost beside the point, and so the men punish they malign the women as vampires and punish them. They in the book they cut off the women's heads so they can't think about the other anymore. They put garlic in their mouths so they can't speak about the other, and they drive a stake through their heart so they can't love the other. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism sort of implicit in the book as well. Dracula comes from Eastern Europe. There's a lot of concern that he's taking out of the country British pounds sterling when they chase him back to Transylvania, that he's taking their money. And I half expected to read a complaint from the vampire hunters that those vampires are taking our jobs or something like that. The kind of complaints you hear about, that you heard about,
any immigrant class.
Yeah, exactly, down through the history of any civilization. It's pretty timeless, and so it's not a coincidence that this book hasn't gone out of print since it appeared in the late 19th century. And so it was really exciting to me that this is a chance to make a ballet that wasn't attempting to be a scary horror movie, but was just a mean-spirited portrait of how people are when they're jealous or just basically just a mean-spirited portrait of people during mating season. And so I think, ironically, I've made the most faithful adaptation of Dracula, even though it's a ballet version.
What's interesting, too, that so many of the themes in Stoker fit into things that you were interested in, kind of motifs that run through all your pictures.
Yeah, which is why I think I was too young to enjoy vampire movies when I was little, because they're the themes that became interesting to me after I lived them. After I went through a horribly jealous period as a young man or something. I just had to live a bit to understand those things.
So it's autobiographical.
Yeah, it is, actually. In complete seriousness. I try to dip myself like a big piece of litmus paper into every one of my movies and make sure it's me when I pull myself out.
It's interesting, though, because you get a chance to work with ballet dancers who really sort of have the kind of expressiveness of silent movie actors. I mean, they really do that kind of thing.
Yeah, when you have a narrative ballet, like a ballet that's actually trying to tell a story from beginning to end, right. Whenever they sort of glide out of dancing and into just pure storytelling, they're actually just doing what silent movie actors do. And so I finally found my perfect silent movie actors. I was amazed at just how expressive ballet dancers are. They've been doing mime their whole lives. And so all of us, but they're not often being filmed in silent narrative movies in black and white with continual music. So it was sort of, you'd think it would be obvious to me, but it was just, I'd made a silent movie when it wasn't dancing. And even when it was dancing, it kind of seamlessly would kind of just take off slowly up out of the mime into dancing and then back down into the mime again. And you'd sort of forget where the dancing is. And I've never been a fan of dance film at all. I resisted accepting this assignment because I felt I would destroy it because I don't go to the ballet ever. And
but it's just another kind of musical in the end.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that's what thrilled me. And there was so much chance to be melodramatic. I should maybe, I won't define the term melodrama, but it's a term that's just used derogatorily all the time. But and when an attempt to define it would be, when you have to tell a whole story in 90 minutes, you have to hyperbolize certain plot twists. You have to make the highs higher and the lows lower and cram it into 90 minutes. You have to make what is typical of melodramas, people have noticed, is they seem to be a bit hysterical. The plots take wider corners than real life would. Then the performances are a little more hyperbolic than naturalism. That's
the thing of presentational, kind of a big, grandiose, operatic old movie style versus representational, which is that naturalism, actor studio bringing it smaller, making it quote-unquote more realistic.
Yeah, and there's no right way. Each story seems to have its right style, I think. What a melodrama can do that naturalism sometimes has to work harder to get at is very raw emotions. When you think of the kind of emotional decorum that's acceptable in public, you're not allowed, right in this situation, to start crying out loud. Any one of us, you'll be considered slightly strange. Or you're not allowed to shout angry epithets at me, or it'll be considered slightly out of line. But in your dreams, where you're being yourself, or some sort of debriefing of the day is going on, and your honest feelings are just coming out, quite often you find yourself terrified and fleeing things, or screaming, or crying, real tears, it feels like, sobbing, you're acting melodramatically in your dream life. And that's the uninhibited part of your day. And so it just seems to me that melodrama isn't life exaggerated, it's just life uninhibited. And
the way life actually feels to us.
Yeah, it's your feelings. It's just uninhibited versions of them, and it's your waking life that's inhibited, and that's what's called naturalism. But what could be more natural than the feelings that you experience when you're dreaming? Those terrors and things, and they're all sort of crammed into the REM state of your night, and it's great melodrama, and that's I think it feels very cathartic to have a good cry or a great sensual experience or whatever in your dreams, and that's why people like melodrama without realizing they're even watching it sometimes. I've just by the same philosophical dictum that everything tastes more or less like chicken. Every movie is more or less melodrama almost. So. That's my working guideline for it.
All right. Seeing this stuff like this collected, can you get a chance to kind of see all of your motifs kind of resurfacing?
Yeah, I think I've been scared of a moment just like this where they're being exposed. And, there's some things that I just never get tired of, and they seem durable to me. For this movie, this is called Cowards Bend the Knee. I intentionally, I made it just a year ago, and I was starting to get tired of people telling me they really liked my movies because they loved non-narrative film, and I had worked so hard to get the stories. It's a compliment. They're paying me a compliment, but so I decided to go to one of the most durable stories. I went back to I read some Euripides. It's 2,500 years old. I read Electra. I loved it. It felt like reading like a crazy Mexican comic book or something like that. Just really torridly wild and operatic and very it's like one of the first melodramas. It's great. And it's durable, it's still in print, and I really loved it. And so I thought I would use that as a basic structure for a story, and then just pile on my own concerns, which I found were already there in the story anyway. And I was able to make it a literal autobiography by making it's a bit self-indulgent. And I really hemmed and hawed over whether I should do it or not, but I made the protagonist me. His name in the movie is Guy Maddin, and he's and I got to fill him with all the cowardice I feel I represent, and I made him work in a beauty salon, the beauty salon I grew up in, and I made a hockey movie because I also grew up in the Winnipeg Arena. My father was the general manager of the Canadian national hockey team. When I was a kid, I felt really privileged to hang out in the arena there. And so I just was able to pile as much of myself on top of this durable structure. And I found it fit eerily well with this. And so it is a melodrama in which someone's night wishes, their most deeply felt hatreds
and fears.
And fears. A girl who hates her stepfather so much, and her mother, because her father's no longer in the picture, wants them both dead. She's just a spoiled, unbalanced, horribly hurt teenage girl, Electra, and then except in the original play, she teases and torments and tricks, finally manipulates her brother into slaying her mother and her stepfather. But I allow myself to be manipulated by people so much I felt I would just take the place of the brother and make myself a stupidly motivated suitor, and then just take it from there. And so it was a good chance to self-flagellate narratively, and but also
that's
get
what
out
critics
a lot
are for, though. We can do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. Double the fun
for me.
Yes. And then it also enabled me to put some autobiographical moments from my family history in it, and even cast family members. I put my mother in the movie, and but the themes of the movie are too personal and confessional, so I haven't yet shown her the movie. Nor, as a matter of fact, did I allow her to look at the movie while we were making it. I got her to play her mother, who was blind, and I put dark glasses on her, which I'd painted over with 2 coats of black paint to make sure she couldn't see what was going on in the scene. And
what did she think you were doing?
Well, I just told her she was, blind, and then. But I was scared that she could see around the edges a lot, so I made sure that the lights were shining right on her at all times. And every now and then I'd say, "Gee, Mom, you must be just about blind with those bright lights and those glasses." And she'd go, "Yeah, I can't see anything." I go, "Fine." And we'd roll the scene and things. Now I have to come clean with her. She's, I love her dearly, and I'm proud of the movie. I really want to show it to her, but I'm not quite sure. I just felt, since I was doing my autobiography, I had to do something that felt like sneaking into the liquor cabinet and stealing something. So I guess that's what that moment sort of felt like to me, and I had to do it. And now I have to get grounded, something for about a month or something like that, just to make up for what I most puerilely did.
Now, this last clip is from the saddest music in the world, and it combines every single thing we've talked about tonight in one clip.
Isabella Rossellini plays a beer baroness who wears beer-filled glass leg prosthetics, whatever. Anyway, she, I don't know, what do you want?
It's another rivalry. It's a big contest.
Yeah,
it's golly season's going on. You got Mark McKinney doing sort of Jimmy Cagney and Clark Gable, and it's Busby Berkeley, and it's also gritty 30s Warner Brothers stuff. And
yeah, there's the story is about two brothers who are rivals in a music contest to determine which country has the saddest music in the world. So it's really an excuse for an orgy of self-pity. A lot of the author of the original story, Kazuro Ishiguro, really was determined in basically his most persistent script editor notes were always that he wanted to maintain his original political satire elements, that whenever, say, third world nations in need of charity go out begging for alms from the have countries, that they actually already take their already horrible plight and are compelled to exaggerate it to seem even worse.
Basically, it turned into a stage show.
Yeah, it becomes a competitive spectacle, which is grotesque, and usually there's only one winner. I think he was inspired by the famous and horrible Ethiopian drought of the early 80s, which became really sexy, kind of a sexy tragedy, because all these pop singers recorded, I forget what it was, Tears Are Not Enough, or We Are the World, or something like that. And then the drought continued for another decade or something, but in the fashion of charity, the hemlines dropped and a Bolivian earthquake became more sexy, and so charity went there after everyone kind of got sick of this drought, and it just seemed so inhuman but timelessly human, that's the nature of charity. So we just wanted to showcase this grotesque limbo dance, getting down lower beneath your rival each time to win sort of this crown of tears. So there's all this sadness that's going on, but oddly enough, there's all this fake sadness on top of it. And I guess this, so I sort of noticed that this goes on not just at a national level, but at a human level too. And there's a lot of manipulation of among lovers and family members using the same kind of pity and stances, and so I used it as his backdrop of political satire as an excuse just to haul out my usual sibling rivalries and melodramatic things, and they dovetailed together rather nicely. And so yeah, there are two brothers not in love with, but involved with the same woman. I was able to get some Lon Chaney stuff. There's sort of an allegory of disability, because Isabella Rossellini plays a double amputee, and she is missing her legs and it's the fault of Mark McKinney, and so there gets to be lots of motivation for revenge and all the lust that comes with it, and all those things. To get ready for the movie, actually, Isabella and I just watched a bunch of Lon Chaney pictures together, and we're both huge fans of silent cinema, and it was a great way just to get into it, and she really got into it, walking around in those prosthetic legs.
Well, I think on that question and that note, we should thank Guy Maddin for being here.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you so much.